Okay, with us today for my final pod of the week, we have the Athletics commissioning editor, Dom Fifield, as well as German football writer Raphael Honigstein as well. Dom, let's start with you on this. Let's get some of the details as to Roy Hodgson's exit. I was going to ask, where did it go wrong? But I think we all raised an eyelid when he got offered another year at Palace, really.
Yeah, I mean, look, that probably, with the benefit of hindsight, sent out the wrong message. It basically announced to the world that Palace were going to have a year in transition, a year when they hadn't been able to secure a long-term successor to Patrick Vieira, effectively, who
Mm,
was dismissed in March time last year. Roy had done an excellent job towards the back end of last season, winning five out of their last 10 Premier League games, finishing mid-table comfortably from
mm,
what had looked at one stage as if it was going to be a proper relegation scrap. Um, and I think he agreed to come back for the year because Palace didn't have anyone else that they fully trusted. There was no one else available as far as they were concerned that they could convince to come who would be a long-term project manager at Palace. So Roy took it on. He lost Wilfried Zaha. He didn't lose any of the expectations that had been fueled by that 10-game run at the end of last season. And there was some pretty unrealistic aims for this season, I think, or certainly amongst from those on the outside looking in. I think, I mean, actually, I think the squad has been
mm,
proved to be pretty paper thin this year. They obviously lost Zaha. They started the season without Elise, who had a bad hamstring injury that he inflicted during the European Under-21s tournament with France. And Eberechi Eze has also been suffering from injuries this year. So actually, Palace have their squad has really been stretched this season, and it's no great surprise to me that they've ultimately struggled and have found themselves back in a relegation battle and needing a bit of fresh impetus from somewhere.
I don't know if it was just me, but Elise with his injury record coming on at Brighton as the team are trailing 3-0. I heard we've actually reported on it as well that that those kind of decisions potentially could have angered the hierarchy at Palace, but also history also tells us that the hierarchy at Palace can be angered by quite a few things in general.
I think you need the context of everything that was going on at the club at
Mm,
that particular time. You're losing 3-0 at half time against your bitter rivals. Um, there's a lot of pressure out there anyway because you lost your previous away game 5-0 at Arsenal, and there have been protests amongst the away support that day with
mm,
banners up against questioning the ambition of the club and the ownership structure, which is an ongoing problem at Palace. And I
mm,
will stress throughout this podcast, I hope that Palace cannot move on until they have sorted out their ownership
mm,
structure and worked out what they want to do, how they want to attack the future. But yeah, 3-0 down at half time. Elise is brought on. He's apparently fit enough to play as far as the medical staff are concerned, as far as Roy Hodgson is concerned, and I suspect as far as the player is concerned as well.
mm, mm,
Um, and with hindsight, that looks an absolute disastrous decision because he lasts 11 minutes and then hobbles off with a new hamstring problem that's going to keep him out for 2 months.
mm,
And it was the perfect storm at that point. Palace just needed a G up. They'd been so ineffective in that first half at the Amex Stadium that Elise injecting something into their second half performance might have given some hope. It would have looked a bit odd. I think Roy Hodgson has argued that, had they kept their best available player on the bench throughout the second half, given that Eze was also out at the time. Um, but it didn't work out that way. And in the benefit of hindsight, it looks a terrible, terrible decision, and has denied Crystal Palace their one of their more flamboyant attacking players for again a long period of time.
Rafa, I just want to bring you in very quickly here. Dom talks about from the outside looking in. I guess Roy Hodgson pedigree as a manager has never been questioned really. What he's done in Europe and also what he's done in the UK as well. And there's a sense that Palace holds this very special place in his heart as a club. But I guess from an ambitious perspective, offering him another year, as Dom has mentioned, doesn't probably show much ambition moving forward. It's probably more of an interim kind of conversation, really.
Yeah, and I think it goes to the heart of some of the discontent. Dom is a better place than me
Mm,
to talk about this, but I always got the sense that Palace, like similar clubs, one of them in London I can think of, they don't want to just survive. They want to
mm,
get a sense of excitement, trying to get higher, trying to get into Europe, trying to do something, trying to play good football, and just doing the bare minimum just to keep ticking over until another
mm,
season of misery is perhaps too strong a word, but sort of inertia is not what football is about, really. And I think that combination, that situation, and Hodgson for another year possibly being there, I think that contributed a lot to the sense of unrest
mm.
and need for change as far as the terraces were concerned.
You have to
Yeah.
bear in mind also that the club are clearly prioritising the redevelopment of Selhurst Park, the main stand, and that has taken the focus financially as well. So, you know, for successive cup summers, really, Palace haven't spent an awful lot in the transfer window. They haven't added to the manager's options particularly impressively. I mean, I know, you know, they bring in a player for like 15 to 20 million pounds, and for Palace that still feels like a significant investment, and it probably is given their commercial revenues, but in Premier League terms that's not significant. You know, you buy a player from Brazil for 15 million euros.
Mm,
If you're Chelsea, you ship that player off to Strasbourg for a couple of years to gain some game time and develop. If you're Crystal Palace, you actually need that player to hit the ground running in the Premier League and make an immediate impact, and I'm not sure how realistic that is.
And what about the decision then to move on from Roy Hodgson? I mean, they've been reported and clearly shown that he did collapse in training. I mean, that must be a very difficult conversation to have just in general. But what was there a point in the season where maybe the hierarchy done with thinking we might need to reshape this and we might need to actually change who is leading this team?
Look, the reality of it is that the heavy defeats at Arsenal and at Brighton really made change inevitable, I think, at the
Mm,
club. I mean, look, as a club, when you put a manager on a 1 year contract, you should be out there looking for who he's going to be his long-term
mm,
successor throughout anyway. And we've seen today in Oliver Glasner has given his first interview to Palace's in-house television, and he's talked about contact being made in the autumn last year.
mm,
That's completely understandable that Palace had to plan ahead, but his onus at the time was his priority and preference was to start working with a pre-season, so start in the summer, which again makes sense. But I think the manner of those defeats and the sense of toxicity that was generating in the stands, the discontent, the disillusion, the sense that this club was really sort of meandering
yeah.
dangerously close to the relegation zone in a season where everybody assumed there wasn't going to be much of a risk of relegation given the points deductions others have suffered and the three promoted clubs.
Mm,
I think that that's brought matters to a head. What I what I should probably stress is this may be painted now, the Glasner appointment, as great long-term planning. You know, oh yeah, Palace made the contact in the autumn and they brought him in and it's brilliant and
mm,
they've really planned ahead and he's the man to take Palace forward. That may ultimately be what it looks like, but I don't think it was this month. I think that the board went through various different candidates, different
mm,
managers. They considered them all, and I don't think Oliver Glasner was necessarily the first one that they considered bringing in now, because he'd made this so obvious that he would prefer to come in the closed season. So
mm,
they had to look elsewhere first of all to see who else who might come in and inject a bit more belief into the structure and the squad and ultimately propel Palace away from the relegation zone. So I think this was quite a messy process. I don't think it was as clear cut and defined as it might be portrayed now. But ultimately, they probably have got an excellent candidate to take the club forward if he can get through and negotiate these next 13 matches.
yeah. Raf, just before we delve deeper into who Glasner actually is, and obviously you will know him from the Bundesliga. Do you get a sense of how he felt about taking charge of Palace at this time of the season?
I think, as Dom alluded to, I think there was a bit of reluctance on his behalf to jump into the cold water, as it were, at this point. You don't want to come from two teams that you've led to the Champions League to a team that might end up in the Championship. That is not where his personal ambition is. But I think he took a lot of time deliberating this decision. I think the fact that it was a slightly drawn out process had as much to do with him as with Palace. I think he was really weighing up the pros and cons. He had other offers, including one very exciting one from a big German club that he turned down because he was more excited about Palace and the Premier League. But of course, I mean, if you're a manager, I think you always want to have your preseason. You want to have an influence on the squad. You don't want to take over a team that is, by definition, low on confidence, that has maybe injuries as well. And we also know, and I think this is an important point, that English football, for whatever reason, tends to be less forgiving to coaches who don't have an immediate impact. In Germany, you can get relegated, like Klopp was with Mainz, and still go to Dortmund, still go up the ladder, because people look at the bigger picture, look at your coaching and say, this guy, we believe in him. In England, it seems for me a lot harder. Think about Vincent Kompany. Will he have as many big offers next year if he takes Burnley down, even though he's still the same manager, essentially, that had lots of big offers last summer? So I think that's something that weighed on his mind as well. How do I look to potential other big clubs if I were to go down, or if indeed I can't manage to get Palace as high up the table as I was able to do with Wolfsburg and Frankfurt in the Bundesliga. So these things played on his mind, but I think eventually the lure of the Premier League and Palace was too great to say no.
Yeah, well, let's delve deeper into the man himself. When I was working for CBS a couple of seasons ago, on the Europa League, I watched that Frankfurt team absolutely obliterate the Europa League, unbeaten entirety of the competition. I was like, wow, okay, some young players here, some experienced players here, and a manager that's incredibly charismatic as well. Raf, just give us a sense of who Palace are taking on, because it goes beyond his achievements at Frankfurt, really, doesn't it?
It does. I think he has shown everywhere he worked that he can be successful within the constraints of the club. He's left every club in a better place than they were when he took over. And I think that is always a great sign of a manager, to get the maximum or perhaps beyond out of a squad. He is quite intense, and there's perhaps if he doesn't feel that the needs of the team are being addressed, he's not shy about talking about it. Quite openly, quite, ruthlessly, if you might say. I think for him, it's not so much about politics, but really venting and getting rid of that frustration that I'm sure lots of managers have when they don't get what they want in the transfer market. But of course, it does create a bit of tension. And when things are not really going so well, then that friction can lead to people parting their ways, which happened with Wolfsburg and Frankfurt. But I think ultimately what's most important is that there's a really good coach here. There's a guy who's got a pretty strong idea for what he wants his football to look like, but is not dogmatic about the means to make it happen. He's not wedded to a particular system, not wedded to a particular way of pressing in a particular area. Can be higher, can be lower. Yes, it's very intense. Yes, it's about putting pressure on the opposition, being quite direct, being quite vertical, but he adjusts quite well, I think, to the teams and the characteristics of the players at his disposal, and finds winning combinations of personnel and systems for them. And again, I think, what more can you really ask from a coach? But yeah, he's intense. He doesn't take any prisoners on the training ground or in the boardroom. I guess, like all managers at this level, he's slightly crazy, because you don't get ahead in this game unless you are, I think, as a coach. But I think if I was a Palace fan, I'd be very excited that at least there'll be somebody who's going to give it a real go, and is not going to take no for an answer, and is not going to immediately think, okay, the extent of our ambition is always just to stay up, and that's what we're going to play for every single season. He's got his eye on bigger and greater things.
We're all sort of excited by those wonderful words there by Raf on Glasner, but slight caveat and sort of pricked my ear a little bit is frustration with board. Crystal Palace and board, as we've just mentioned, can be a little tricky. Should Palace fans be worried about this?
Well, yeah, look, I mean, I suspect there will be some friction at some point. That's almost inevitable. And yeah, if Oliver Glasner looks at Crystal Palace's transfer dealings in the last few windows, I mean, he surely must have looked at them and realised that they're not the Premier League's biggest spenders. They target a certain type of player, younger players these days that they can develop and sell on at profit. That is just where Palace are, and I suspect there'll be departures, high profile departures from Selhurst Park in the summer, preferably before June the 30th to comply with PSR and FFP, etc. That will then allow Palace to hopefully regenerate and revitalise the squad, and with players that maybe are better suited to what he wants to achieve at the club. I think that's perfectly logical. It's he will have gone into this with his eyes open on that front. It is a tricky situation board wise, and yeah, Palace do need to work out where the club is going off the pitch, and what do they want to be. We have a situation where, I mean, Steve Parish is very much the man in control, but his shareholding at the club is, I think it's under 10%. He has equal voting rights with his three other big co-owners, the other members of the big four there. But what is John Textor who owns 45%? What does he want to do with the club long term? I think it's probably very different to what Steve Parish does, the way that they go about things. And then coupled to all that, you've got these two billionaires in the States, in Josh Harris and David Blitzer, who are very much almost like silent partners. I mean, they liaise once a week on these Zoom calls with Textor and Parish but I don't think they're not quite as engaged, let's say, certainly as Steve Parish is. And Palace just need to work out how they move forward. How they fund the stadium, how they fund the team rebuild, how they satisfy the sporting director, Dougie Freedman, and now how they satisfy a very ambitious head coach in Oliver Glasner.
Raf, Dom's just mentioned potential outgoings in the summer. A very young, talented squad, in fact, actually. Some key players potentially might leave Palace this summer. In terms of Glasner, and I don't know enough at this point, but is he also a builder of teams? Does he have a sense of the kind of players he wants to bring into a club from his time at Frankfurt, from his time at Wolfsburg?
The idea that coaches build teams is not really one that's very prevalent in Germany, because sporting directors buy teams and build teams. As a coach, you have your ideas. You say, I want a fast winger. I don't like this guy. I need a different centre back. But the sporting directors, sort of 2/3 of the decision-making process is really with them. And then the coach says, yes, I agree or not. So on the one hand, he's used to working like that because he's never worked any different. But he's never been quite happy with that either, and has always pushed for a bit more control and a bit more input, and has not been shy about letting everyone know if his wishes are not being respected. I don't think it comes with him, knowing him a little bit. I don't think it comes from a position of ego for him. I think it comes purely from a position of, what do I need for the team? And if he doesn't get it, it annoys him, frustrates him, and he can't hide that frustration. And he's not willing to just suck it up and say, okay, fine, I'm just going to pretend that I've got the best team when I clearly haven't. So I couldn't give you a squad or an ideal Glasner squad if he were to able to construct one. But if there's one theme that's a little bit sort of a leitmotif in some of the stuff he's done is pace. I think pace is very important for him because of the amount of running and amount of ground that his teams tend to cover. And he is very concerned with sort of defensive quality. He went on a big rant in Frankfurt saying, reminded me of something that Klopp said in different terms when he had problems at Liverpool. He said, you can't coach things like that. You can't coach quality when they let in another few goals too many. So I think for him to have reliable centre backs that know what they're doing, they don't need to be micromanaged, you know, in the way they position themselves, the way they go for headers, like all the basics. Even though he was a former defender himself, and I'm sure he can help them. I think that's also key for him.
Yeah, and what style of football should Palace fans expect? You said he's adaptable for sure. Are we talking intense pressing football?
They like to be quite active. They like to have the ball. They like to make it difficult for the opposition to play through, put pressure on them. Sort of nothing out of the ordinary, or in terms of where 2024 is in football, but very, I would say, structured. And there's always a clear game plan for him. The game plan might change from game to game and from formation to formation, but his players always know what they're supposed to do, which is why, again, he's had success. I think he's very good in communicating his ideas and making sure that the players, to the best of their abilities, put it into practice.
Yeah, and just finally, we know Palace love young, youthful players, amazing, potentially can sell on or whatnot. Through his experience, is he good with young players as well, Raf?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clubs like Frankfurt and Wolfsburg will always have experience in the dressing room, but there is a nice mix, and young players have shown for him. Old players have shown for him. Again, I would say he's the type of manager that tends to improve players within reason. If he decides that you're not good enough, then I think he focuses his energy elsewhere and sees whether he can promote somebody else or persuade the board to buy somebody else. So he will not, I think, try to sort of chase forlorn courses and stick with players that he feels are simply just not up for it.
Okay. Well, this all sounds really good, Dom, from a Palace perspective anyway. It sounds really fascinating in terms of where Palace might want to go. Still not quite sure what that looks like, but I'm also fascinated by who else was in the running for this. We spoke about it very slimly at the top. What other names were put on the table other than Glasner?
Well, look, we've covered this in the piece that Matt Wiesner wrote in the Athletic. They looked at Kieran McKenna at Ipswich and everything that he's done there, hoisting that team out of League One and into a promotion race in the Championship. They looked at Julen Lopetegui, not least because of what he achieved at Wolverhampton Wanderers last season, where he took over a team, I think they were bottom of the table at the time, and took them safely into mid-table. But for whatever reason, whether that was, lack of experience or the sheer cost of a deal, neither of those, materialized in anything. And Oliver Glasner was available. I mean, he has been available for a while, and once I think they were given the right indications that he would be prepared to come early, as in now, as opposed to the summer, then that is the route they went down. Look, it's a risk still. It's a risk because for all the reasons that Rafa has detailed there of what he wants to do and what he wants in a team and what he needs in a team. For the next 13 games, he can't be that picky or choosy as to who he's got to work with, because Palace's squad is very, very thin. I mean, look at the bench at Goodison Park on Monday. I think there were 4 or 5 youth team players with one Premier League appearance amongst them. And Matias França, the aforementioned Brazilian that we mentioned at the start of the podcast. I mean, he's had 1 Premier League start. So it's not going to be easy for him. And likewise, yes, he sounds as if he likes pace in his team. I'm not sure there is much lightning pace in this Palace team. I mean, Elise, when he's fit, whether that's at the end of March or the beginning of April, will provide some. Eberechi Eze, when he's fit, will provide some, although he's not explosive pace. He has that sort of gliding style that's he's probably deceptively quick. But other than that, I mean, I'm not sure. There's a lack of dynamism and energy into this team, and so he's going to have to adapt to keep Palace clear, which is why the next 13 games are so intriguing, I think, because I don't think we'll see Glasner ball, if that what we're going to call it. I don't think we'll see
Don't
that until
start that.
next
Don't
season.
start
Well,
that yet. Not yet. Not
Palace
yet.
fans already are, believe me. But I don't think we'll see that until next season, and I think that's completely realistic because until he has a squad that can play the type of football that he wants them to play, it's not going to be a recognisable Oliver Glasner team. And hopefully that's where the pragmatism that he does have in his managerial locker comes into play and keeps Palace well clear of trouble this year.
Ref, I just want a quick one on, top managers taking on, and you sort of alluded to it earlier, the challenge of the Premier League. Top managers taking on what many would class as sort of mid-table teams. I mean, look at Emery, look at Lopetegui, look at Iraola, for instance. Is there something here about managers who've achieved great stuff elsewhere, wanting to really test themselves in the Premier League, and perhaps there's a fascination there with taking these teams to the very top?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. I think a lot of managers, and of course players, but we're talking about managers, have a romantic view of English football and want to be part of that. For some, it's about mixing it up with the best coaches in the world and see where they fit in and how they measure up against them. There's also, I think, this idea, rightly or wrongly, that managers, especially when they're successful, tend to be more powerful in the Premier League than perhaps other places. When you think about the kind of power that Klopp and Guardiola have amassed, or even Arteta, even Unai Emery, who's made the club a bit of a fiefdom for himself. I think there is a sense that you can be given a lot of time and a lot of power, perhaps more so than in a comparable club in Germany or elsewhere on the continent, where there's always more sporting competence above you. There's always a sporting director who's a former player, who's a big name. Then there might be a chairman who's a former player, who's a big name. You'll have ex-players involved who all think they know better than you. So it's a different kind of culture, if you will, for managers. And at least from the outside looking in, a lot of these things are very attractive.
Dom, Glasner's first match is against Burnley, Saturday against Burnley, I should say, at Selhurst Park. How real is the threat of relegation for Palace this season? We're still yet to find out what happens to Everton and obviously Nottingham Forest as well. And also, I mean, Luton look interesting, but Burnley, Sheffield United, I mean, they're not looking the strongest, are they?
Well, they're not, but you imagine what would happen, the shockwaves that would be sent through the club if Burnley won at Selhurst Park on Saturday. Then suddenly you really are looking over your shoulder. It's two wins in 6, I think, in the Premier League, but actually, that's the glass half full version of it. You have to go back a long time, back to actually the corresponding fixture at Burnley last year to see the last victory Palace had prior to the wins over Brentford and Sheffield United. I just think that because of the squad depth and because they've been denied Eze and Elise for so much of this season, and also, I mean, Cheick Doucouré was such a big player for Palace. He was the glue. He was the player of the year, the defensive midfielder who knitted it all together. He's ruled out for the rest of the season. They've not had Mark Gay of late as well, after a knee problem suffered at Brighton. When you take those 4 players out of this Palace team, it looks more Championship than Champions League contenders. Let's put it like that. You're taking potentially 4 Champions League players out of the team there, and the rest. There's a big drop off to the rest of them, and that sounds terribly disrespectful to the Palace squad. And there's still potential there. There's still some quality. I thought their performance at Goodison Park on Monday was actually really quite resilient and impressive in periods. It was a horrible game. I know that anyone who didn't have a vested interest in that match would have turned off after 20 minutes, if that. But there was a resilience there that they haven't shown at times on the road of late, and I think that bodes well for Glasner. But I think the reality that they tire in the last 15-20 minutes of games, and they will do probably against Burnley as well, just shows how thin this squad is. And any squad that is like that, denied its 4 best players, is going to feel in trouble in a division that is actually surprisingly tight at the bottom. You take away Burnley and Sheffield United maybe, but Luton have surprised everybody. We don't know what's going to happen with Nottingham Forest. We don't know what's going to happen with Everton. And this uncertainty just fuels, trepidation and a little bit of simmering panic in there as well. So we'll see. I think victory on Saturday in his first game would ease a lot of nerves. They've got Luton coming up in a couple of weeks' time as well. If they come through those matches with wins, I'm sure Palace will be fine and they'll kick on, because they'll have these players, apart from Doucouré, they'll all come back in and be drip fed back into the team. But until then, everything's on edge. And so it's to a new manager coming into a new division, new surroundings, and working with a squad of players that he might not be best suited to. But let's see how he does.
Yeah, just a quick one then, and we've spoken on this in a previous pod you were on, Dom, in terms of ambition of the owners for Palace. Do we feel with this new appointment the ambition is to, maybe not this season, but next season, try and see if we can creep up the table, challenge for European football, dare I say it?
Look, I'm sure that is the ambition, and that's what they've spoken about in the past, but that might prove wholly unrealistic. Look at the Premier League. Look at the clubs above Crystal Palace in the Premier League. Look at the top 10. I mean, even saying that Palace should finish in the top half, they've done that once since getting promoted in 2013. They've finished in the top half once, and yet they've never finished below 15th. They're in that little bracket in the middle. But there's a ceiling there. If other teams get their act together and they perform as they can with their commercial revenues, with their financial clout, they will finish above Crystal Palace in the table. So I think actually aiming for 9th or 10th is realistically that's a challenge. That's a real challenge. And if he does that, then fair play to him. I know there have been, Brentford have done it and Brighton have done it on occasion. Sheffield United did it one year, finishing the top half, finish higher than Palace have done since getting promoted. But Palace have got an awful lot of regeneration to do this summer again. I am excited by it. I think it will be, once we get through these 13 games, I think next season will be really, really intriguing to see how he does and how he attacks that. And I'm sure he will have the ambition and self-belief that he can muscle Palace into that top 10 with the prospect possibly of cup success and European football. But we've got to get there first. And then there's got to be a big summer of sales and purchases. And then let's see where we are and what state the club's in come August.
Yeah, I like that word, regeneration, Rafa. And just to finish on this, for Glasner, going in with his eyes open on this does feel like a regeneration project. And we talk about the things you said about being a Premier League manager, having the power or having the opportunity to regenerate this club and take it to a place it's never been must be something that any manager's licking their lips at. But he'll need the money as well. I mean, that's the big one. If you're going to challenge those guys up top, you need the money.
Yeah, you need the money in the Premier League. It's going to be difficult to do it without it. I think he will collectively improve this team. Whether that's enough to really push into that top half or even top third remains to be seen. It might be that the glass ceiling is rather low for Palace, and that the teams above them are simply too strong and too big to fail. But he will give it a go. And I think his idea is that he'll do enough, he'll make enough noise in a positive way and play enough good football to either do it with Palace or get noticed by a team with more money and then get a crack at it with more resources.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's leave it there. Dom, Raf, thank you so much for your time. And do not forget to rate and review the podcast. And we'll be back tomorrow for another episode of the Athletic Football Podcast with Adam and the crew. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click subscribe for more content like this. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season to bring you the inside track to the biggest stories in football. If you'd like to listen to the full episodes for free, search the Athletic Football Podcast wherever you get your podcasts from.